Have you ever heard of a robbery that ended not with police shots, but with the fury of murderous marimbondos? In Houston, an armed gang lived a real nightmare while trying to rob an abandoned warehouse. It looks like an action movie scene, but what happened there was something that no one could have imagined, an attempted crime that turned into a real, natural horror story. Three men, motivated by easy money and believing that an empty warehouse would be easy prey, entered the scene with guns drawn, ready to take whatever they could get their hands on. But what they did not know was that by breaking an old wall, they would awaken a force of nature that had been hidden for years in that forgotten building. Imagine the scene. The sound of concrete shattering, the silence that precedes chaos. Suddenly, hundreds of giant marimbondos, which had been there for years, protected by a rusty wall, were freed. And they were not ordinary marimbonds. These insects were huge, aggressive, and voracious, ready to defend their territory at any cost. What was supposed to be a quick robbery turned into an avalanche of panic, screams, and shots hurriedly fired into the air as desperate criminals tried to escape from the swarm that mercilessly attacked them. Can you imagine the scene? Frightened men, wounded by stings, rushed in different directions, while terror spread on all sides. Nearby residents heard the shots, the screams, and the noise of an unparalleled confusion. Not understanding exactly what was happening, they called the police, who soon arrived on the scene to try to control the situation. What seemed like an ordinary robbery turned into a kind of chaos of natural terrors, a scene that looks like something out of a thriller or a horror story. Two of the criminals ended up arrested, covered in stings, while the third was found hours later, almost unconscious, victim of the relentless attack of the insects. And the most impressive thing of all, the whole city began to comment on the case as a kind of divine justice, a wild and unexpected punishment sent by nature against those who dared to invade a space that was not theirs. Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you even more about the unfolding of this bizarre story. If this story left you with a racing heart, or made you reflect on the power of nature in our life, leave here in the comments what touched you the most or what was the part that surprised you the most. Your opinion is very important, because it helps create a closer and more real conversation with those who follow the channel, as well as encouraging more people to share their own experiences and opinions about stories like this. If you liked the video so far, don't forget to like it, because it shows that you value this type of content and helps the channel grow by reaching more people who are also interested in amazing stories and amazing facts. And if you want to continue inside stories like this, tips and analysis of unusual events, subscribe to the channel. Here the goal is to create a community where we can learn, have fun, and be scared together by the unknown. Your participation makes all the difference, because it is she who keeps this space active, relevant, and full of stories that really make us reflect on what is happening around us. So the invitation remains: leave your comment, like the video, and subscribe so as not to miss anything. Thus you are part of a community that values quality content and genuine interest in everything mysterious and amazing. And of course, there's plenty more to come, with stories that will hold you from start to finish. It was night in Houston, a night that seemed quiet but charged with a quiet tension in the air. The sparsely populated industrial area looked deserted, with few lights flashing in the distance, reflecting a backdrop that seemed perfect for those who wanted to act unnoticed. The cold dawn air mixed with the smell of iron and concrete, creating an atmosphere that seemed almost forgotten by time. In this environment, an old warehouse stood out for its deteriorated appearance, with rusty metal walls, broken windows, and a door that creaked with every movement of the wind. From the outside, it looked like an abandoned place, forgotten by the city, but in fact it hid valuable secrets and a storage routine that few knew about. For many, that would be just another empty building in the silent night, but for some it was a golden opportunity. Three criminals, known in the region for their impulsive actions and risky decisions, had chosen that place to carry out a scam that, in theory, promised to be easy and profitable. The idea was simple: break into the warehouse, take whatever was valuable, and disappear before any warning. They believed that because it was an ancient structure, they could act quickly and without attracting attention. They did not imagine that, at that very moment, the night reserved a surprise that would totally change the course of that story. The plan began with a silent approach. The three men moved carefully, knowing that any noise could alert someone or attract the attention of more attentive neighbors. With improvised tools, they began to break down an old wall, a structure that had seemed on the verge of collapsing for years. The intention was to create a quick entrance, a direct passage to the interior of the warehouse, where supposedly there would be high-value goods. But in doing so, they awakened something that had long been hidden there, a force of nature that until then had seemed dormant. The wall shattered with a bang, and at that instant, hundreds of giant creatures who were hiding behind a rusty wall were released. Huge marimbondos, the size of which would surprise anyone, began to fly towards the invaders. The reaction was instantaneous. The men who until then had been confident of the success of the coup turned around in despair as they realized what had happened. The deafening hum, mixed with the smell of iron and poison, invaded the room, creating an atmosphere of absolute chaos. They tried to flee, but the swarm had become relentless, attacking with a ferocity no one could have predicted. At that time, the scenario changed completely. What should have been a silent and swift invasion turned into a desperate escape. The criminals ran in different directions, trying to escape from the attack of the killer insects. Some of them were seriously injured by stings, falling to the ground unable to defend themselves. Others, frightened and panicked, took refuge behind pillars or ran towards the exit, hoping to escape from that flying hell. The sound of buzzing, mixed with the screams of pain and fear, echoed throughout the area, creating an almost surreal scene, as if nature itself was taking revenge on those who dared to invade its sacred space. Nearby residents who heard the gunfire and screams were perplexed by the confusion that ensued there. Some thought it was a street fight or even a police action, but soon realized that something much stranger was happening. Police were quickly called to the scene to try to bring the situation under control. Until then, the story seemed like a typical night of crime in the city. But upon entering the warehouse, the agents realized that this episode had a much greater impact than any ordinary robbery. The two criminals who managed to escape were eventually found hours later, covered with stings and almost unconscious, defeated by an invisible and ruthless enemy. The third, in turn, was located in critical condition, almost without strength, a victim of the fierce attack of the killer swarm. And as the news spread, the city began to comment that this had been a kind of divine justice, a natural punishment for those who dared to invade a space that was not theirs, a warning that nature, unpredictably, always finds a way to balance things. With weapons in hand, the three men broke into the side entrance of the warehouse, with a haste that seemed charged with confidence, as if they were absolutely sure that nothing could go wrong. That movement was decided, almost automatic, the fruit of a routine that they believed they had mastered. The sense of control, however illusory, made them move forward with steady steps, ignoring any sign of danger. The silence that enveloped the shed seemed to protect their steps, as if the structure itself was asleep, oblivious to the presence of those invaders. In their heads, everything was under control, a well-planned strategy, a quick action that would not give room for unforeseen events. At that stage of the invasion, confidence seemed to be at an all-time high. Each movement had an almost mechanical precision, while the hands worked without hesitation. They relied on the idea that the site, having been abandoned for years, had no one else around and that any resistance was unlikely. They believed that with the ease they had gotten there, they could take whatever they wanted and escape without much trouble. The sense of power and the certainty that they were acting intelligently fed a false sense of invincibility. It was as if they had created a bubble of security, an invisible shield against any threat. However, this sense of control was an illusion that shattered in an instant. As soon as they opened the door, an unexpected sight revealed itself before them. The empty space, silent and dark, hid something they could not imagine. A force of nature that for years had been patiently waiting for its time to act. The wall they broke was not just an ancient structure, but a barrier that held a secret community of insects that, when released, would soon show their true power. For them, the biggest risk was to appear too invincible, a confidence that blinded them to real danger. The lateral entry was made with an efficiency that could go unnoticed, but the consequence was a release of a frightening amount of giant marimbondos. When the wall gave way, a cloud of insects began to move towards the environment with frightening speed. The invaders, once so confident, quickly turned around as they realized what had been released. The deafening hum took over the space, a mixture of fear and surprise taking over their minds. The feeling that they had mastered everything, that they were in control of the situation, disappeared in an instant. The reality was different. They were faced with a natural force that they did not know, a force that could not be controlled, only faced or avoided. The moment was one of sheer confusion. The three men, who had previously walked with sure steps, began to run in despair. Their bodies showed signs of fear, of despair, as they tried to escape the swarm of insects that was approaching with ferocity. Hands trembled, breathing quickened, and the feeling of invincibility turned into pure panic. Each of them tried to move away, looking for a refuge, a hiding place, anything that would protect them from that relentless attack. The trust that had fueled the invasion has become a weight on the conscience, a brutal lesson that true control exists only in the minds of those who forget that nature always finds a way to impose itself. Silence, which was once an illusion of security, was replaced by the sound of chaos, the incessant buzzing of insects, the screaming of invaders, the sound of hurried footsteps trying to flee. Everything was mixed in a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The scene looked like a battle of unequal forces, a struggle between man and the element he underestimated. Every second felt like an eternity, every movement a matter of life and death, and it all happened just when they believed nothing could go wrong, an illusion that night was shattered by something they could never have foreseen, the devastating force of a killer swarm, which awoke from its years-long slumber to show that, in the chain of life, balance is more fragile than imagined. Now the real journey began, and the impact of that moment would forever mark the history of that place, a cruel reminder that nature, however silent it may seem, holds secrets that can change everything in the blink of an eye. At that critical moment, the sound of concrete shattering was like a warning cry that echoed throughout the warehouse. The criminal who tried to access an inner room, believing that there he would find a safer route or something valuable, did not imagine that this simple action would trigger a chain of devastating events. With a force that seemed to have been awakened by a greater force, the ancient wall fell apart with a deafening bang, filling the space with dust, pieces of wood, and a momentary silence that was soon replaced by a growing hum. But at the same time as the structure crumbled, it also released something that had been silent for years, hidden in the darkness of that forgotten place. What came along with the bang was a flurry of emotions, fear, surprise, and above all, the revelation of a hidden truth that no one could have imagined. A colossal nest of marimbondos, which was kept protected by layers of wood, webs, and accumulated garbage remains, had been awakened from its deep sleep. These giant insects, which until then had remained silent, now seemed more threatening than ever, with their dark bodies and metallic wings reflecting the little light that penetrated into space. And, as if they were a force of revenge, they launched into a wave of attack against everything nearby, including the invaders who moments before felt confident and in control of the situation. The reaction was instantaneous. The panicked screams mingled with the deafening sound of the wings and the hum that sounded like a melody of destruction. The impact of that moment was not only physical, but emotional, a real lesson in humility before the limits of nature. The criminals, who until then had felt domineering, turned in despair as they realized they had unleashed a force they could not contain. That sudden and brutal attack turned the scene into a real chaos. Men trying to flee with arms raised, trying to protect themselves with their hands or any object within reach, while the swarm became a dark and threatening cloud, invading every space, every corner of that environment, giving no chance of resistance. And there, in that moment of total disarray, the situation completely got out of control. The screams of pain, the attempts to escape, the confusion of desperate movements reflected a struggle that seemed unequal. The bodies of the invaders were covered with stings that burned into the skin, while the insects mercilessly attacked, seeking to defend their territory at any cost. It was a battle between man and force that, no matter how hard he tried to prepare, he had never faced head-on before. Fear took over, and each decision seemed more difficult than the previous one, since the impact of that moment was not only physical, but also psychological. The feeling of invincibility, which had fueled the initial courage, fell apart in the face of an invisible and implacable threat, a true demonstration that nature always finds a way to impose itself. In this scene of despair, the environment became a scene of horror, a spectacle of chaos that seemed to unfold in slow motion. The invaders, now victims of an almost supernatural force, desperately tried to protect themselves, run, hide, but the swarm gave no respite. Every move, every escape attempt was a greater risk of more serious stings. The sound of the hum, which was once only a nuisance, now became a soundtrack of destruction, a symphony of chaos that would forever mark that instant. Thus, what seemed to be a simple action of invasion turned into the gateway to a traumatic experience, a harsh lesson that nature, no matter how hard we try to control it, always holds secrets and forces that we cannot foresee or stop. And as chaos ensued, the truth that this attack was just the beginning began to unfold, leaving an indelible mark on the memory of those who witnessed that moment of transformation. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter. Suddenly, the air was filled with a terrifying hum that seemed to come from all sides at once. It was as if a living cloud of flapping wings could cover the entire area in a matter of seconds. The men who had until then been desperately trying to escape the attack turned towards the swarm with wide eyes as the deafening sound grew more intense. Those giant creatures, with their dark bodies and wings that reflected any slightest light, advanced with frightening speed, forming a mass that seemed to want to swallow everything around them. It was a scene of pure transformation, a true force of nature that showed itself without limits, without mercy. The shots that the criminals fired into the air seemed to be a desperate attempt to scare the insects, to perhaps drive them away, or even to frighten the swarm, but none of this worked. The giant marimbondos, driven by a primal instinct for defense, kept advancing like a raging wave that could not be contained. Every shooting, every attempt to use violence to intimidate, only fueled the fury of that attack. That moment of action turned into the essence of despair, an unequal struggle between man and the element that, at that moment, seemed unbeatable. The feeling that everything could end there, that life itself would become a matter of seconds, hung in the air like a dense, frightening cloud. It was as if the whole universe had turned against them. The sky above, which once looked like just a layer of clouds, now looked like a stage for chaos. The insects, which until then had remained hidden, turned out to be true warriors, a force that had not been seen before, a true revelation of how ruthless nature can be when disturbed. The mass of marimbondos moved in all directions, like a conscious entity, with a clear intention to eliminate any threat. Their giant bodies and vibrating wings created a sound of devastation that mixed with the cry of pain of some of the criminals, who felt the impact of the most voracious stings on their skin. The scene turned into a real battle of resistance, where fear turned into a force that drove each of them to act on impulse. Some tried to protect themselves with improvised clothes. Others ran, looking for any place that could offer a hope of escape. But the truth is that at that moment it seemed that nothing could stop the advance of the swarm. The ferocity of those insects was almost supernatural, as if they were driven by a greater force, a determination that bordered on the obsession to protect their home. The silence, which was once a pause for safety, was replaced by the constant sound of flapping wings, the cry of pain and the desperate effort of those trying to escape. The feeling of helplessness gripped everyone, while chaos ensued without mercy. The impact of that relentless attack was so strong that it felt like time itself had stopped. The men, who entered confident and prepared, were now completely vulnerable to the force of nature they had inadvertently awakened. Every sting, every movement of flight seemed like a struggle against an invisible enemy, a battle that had no winners at that moment. Fear, which was once a controllable emotion, turned into an overwhelming force, pushing them to the limit, making every decision a matter of survival. And so in that scene of destruction, the true impact of that moment showed itself. Nature, with its wild and unpredictable force, had given a lesson that none of them would ever forget, a lesson that revealed the true essence of the delicate balance between man and the natural world. Now all that seemed to be just the beginning of a journey that was yet to show many revelations and unexpected consequences. In that instant of absolute chaos, it seemed as if everything had fallen apart at once. The three invaders, once confident in their strategy, now found themselves completely out of control in the face of the swarm's fury. Without thinking twice, each of them took a different direction, in a desperate attempt to escape the attack that seemed to have no end. Screams of pain, fear, and frustration echoed through the room, mixing with the sound of wings flapping and goods being knocked to the ground. It was a true escape of life and death, where every step seemed a risky bet against one's own destiny. One of them, while trying to run towards the side exit, stumbled upon a pile of cardboard boxes, that were stacked precariously, knocking down everything around him. The scene turned into a mess of objects, pieces of paper, packaging and remnants of merchandise scattered on the floor, all mixing in a desperate attempt to escape from that flying hell. Her screams of despair intensified as she felt the stings begin to burn her skin, as she tried to protect herself with her hands, but the barrage of insects gave no respite. He jumped up and tried to hide behind a pile of cotton bags, but the swarm, guided by an almost instinctive force, wasted no time. The insects pounced with ferocity, finding entry points in the skin and clothing, turning their escape into a real nightmare of pain. Another criminal, in turn, tried to break through an iron door leading to a darker area of the warehouse, hoping to hide or find an alternative escape route, but was prevented by a pile of fallen pallets. He, completely directionless, began to run aimlessly, his heart racing and his ears ringing at the sound of the incessant attack. His disorderly steps caused him to knock over a shelf of goods, which fell with a bang, partially blocking the path he was trying to follow. The confusion increased even more, and fear took over his mind, causing him to get lost among the scattered goods, stumbling and falling several times. Every move was an attempt at survival, a decision made in the heat of the moment, when rationality disappears before the instinct to escape alive. The third, who initially seemed calmer, ended up trapped between several stacked boxes surrounded by the swarm that showed no signs of fatigue or compassion. He tried to protect himself with a jacket, but the stings began to hit sensitive areas, leaving him almost without the strength to move. His screams mingled with the sound of wings that fluttered with frightening intensity as he desperately tried to find a loophole in the mountain of objects around him. The scene became a veritable arena of despair, where every second felt like an eternity of suffering, a fight he knew he had little chance of winning. As the escape unfolded, the environment became even more chaotic. Dropped goods, destroyed boxes, objects flying from all sides. All this created an atmosphere of destruction, as if the structure itself was disintegrating under the pressure of that attack. Cries for help, gasping breaths, and the sound of wings mingled in a symphony of despair, reinforcing that at that moment, the plan to rob a warehouse turned into a fight for survival. Each of them, now completely vulnerable, had to decide whether to continue trying to escape or give in to fear, suffering, and the pain of the stings. That scenario of total collapse seemed to show that many times nature itself reveals its strength in an unexpected way, destroying what was built with arrogance and leaving marks that no one can erase. And all of that, so intense, stood as a reminder that impulsive decisions made with overconfidence can lead to chaos, a lesson they would never forget. Now, each step, each choice, began to become the very essence of a journey of transformation, a reflection on human limits in the face of forces unknown to them. The scene that unfolded in that abandoned warehouse was so surreal that it seemed like something out of an action or horror movie. But unfortunately, it was the pure reality of a night that no one in the neighborhood would soon forget. Residents and employees of nearby enterprises, accustomed to hearing routine noises or even more ordinary events, were surprised by a sound that sounded like a mixture of shots, screams, and the incessant buzz of flapping wings. To anyone who heard it from a window, from a street, or even from inside a store, it sounded like a war scene, something that could only happen in a movie script or in a science fiction narrative. Only that night, it was all real, and the intensity of the social impact of that episode was immediate. Many reports that circulated on social networks and WhatsApp groups spoke exactly about the feeling of living a moment of pure disbelief. People who were working, others who passed through the neighborhood, even merchants, described the episode as something difficult to believe if it was not witnessed up close. Some said that when they heard the noise of shots and screams, they thought it was a police operation or an attempted violent invasion, while others, more sensitive, reported that they initially thought it was a situation of urban violence, such as a fight or street shooting. But as the seconds passed, they realized that what was happening there was something much stranger, something that defied any logic. The presence of a mass of giant insects, which attacked relentlessly, seemed like a nightmare scene, a mixture of reality and fiction that would be marked in everyone's memory. The reaction of the community was instantaneous, and for the most part of a mixture of fear, amazement, and a sense of helplessness. Many people reported that they stood still, not knowing if they should get out of there or just be quiet, waiting for it all to pass. Others desperately ran into their homes or shops, locking doors and windows, trying to protect themselves from an invisible threat, but which made itself felt through pain and panic. Still, one aspect that drew attention was how quickly the news spread, turning into a conversation of social impact that soon became a topic of discussion in the city. After all, it was not every day that one saw such an unusual scene, a situation that defied any rational understanding, mixing elements of a horror film with a lesson that the force of nature is able to show its most ruthless face when we least expect it. The most striking thing about all this is that even in the face of fright and emotional impact, people began to reflect on the vulnerability that we all have in the face of the unknown. That episode revealed, in a raw and direct way, how impulsive decisions can trigger unpredictable consequences, and how living with the unpredictable requires a certain mindset of adaptation. Many wondered if this was an isolated episode, or if the city of Houston itself had kept a hidden truth behind the scenes that had only now come to light. The feeling that all this had been a kind of warning, a message that nature and its secrets still hold forces that can only be understood with a new perspective, began to spread among the residents. And meanwhile, police and experts worked behind the scenes to understand exactly what had happened, seeking answers that could put an end to that night of terror. It was precisely in this climate of uncertainty that the first analyses, the first theories about the backstage of that episode emerged. Many wondered if the release of the giant marimbondos had been a simple accident, or if it was a kind of natural punishment, a defense reaction of an ecosystem that is often underestimated by those who observe it from the outside. The biggest truth hidden behind all that confusion is that it reveals the fragility of our own security, the illusion of control that we often carry without realizing it. And all this, in one way or another, makes each person who lived that moment reflect more deeply on the decisions they make, on the limits of what we can or cannot manipulate in our relationship with the environment. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, exploring the behind the scenes of this social transformation and the revelations that this night brought to light about our journey of coexistence with the natural world, with the impact that our actions can generate, and with the consequences that we often insist on ignoring. When police finally arrived on the scene they found was one of chaos and destruction. Two of the criminals were leaning against the wall, covered with stings, with expressions of pain and despair. Their faces were marked by tears of irritation and fear as they tried, with trembling hands, to relieve the stinging of the stings on their skin. One of them, almost without strength, begged for help, asking for any kind of help, while the other tried to stay on his feet, but also showed obvious signs of suffering. The scene was one of clear defeat. They believed that they could act with ease, that the blow would be a quick victory, but what they received was an unexpected punishment, a real lesson that nature, when awakened, does not forgive. The third criminal, in turn, was located hours later, almost unconscious on a plot near the warehouse. Paramedics who arrived at the scene reported that he had several wounds, as well as signs of exhaustion and a severe allergic reaction, a consequence of the stings. He was immediately taken to hospital while officers returned to the scene to collect evidence. That moment of capture was inevitable, and in a way even predictable, since the strength of the insects and the speed with which they attacked left no room for any attempt to escape. The real surprise was the punishment that awaited them, as a natural and just punishment, a kind of divine justice that often manifests itself in ways we cannot foresee. The capture scene revealed a hidden truth that many people had ignored until then, that no matter how much human actions are planned, the impact of our decisions can be unpredictable, and nature always finds a way to restore its balance. In this case, the imbalance was caused by a passing arrogance, an exaggerated confidence in one's own intelligence, and the ability to manipulate the environment around him. But in the moment of truth, it became clear that this mentality of absolute control is an illusion. When humans challenge themselves to do something that pushes the boundaries of what is natural, they end up paying a high price, often in a way they never imagined. And that lesson came with overwhelming force, a demonstration that true strength lies not in the gun, the firearm or the strategy, but in the very essence of what we are capable of when we disrespect the boundaries of the world around us. Those who watched the scenes closely understood that nothing in life is guaranteed, especially when trying to trample what is most fundamental in existence. respect for the natural cycle, the limits of the environment, and life itself. The capture of the criminals was the definitive proof that even when we try to act above the rules, there are forces that we cannot control, and that often life itself gives us a lesson in humility. The wounded, the frightened, the ashamed, all had to accept that what appeared to be an easy profit action had turned into their greatest defeat, a defeat that came from a source they underestimated, the relentless force of nature's own impact. This story, which seemed like a simple robbery attempt, ended in a way that no one could have predicted, leaving an indelible mark on the memory of those who followed it closely. The sense of justice was reinforced by that inevitable outcome, a clear demonstration that the balance of the natural world is delicate, and that in defying these forces, we are subject to consequences that cannot be avoided. What happened there was more than a simple capture. It was a revelation that our actions will always have effects, often invisible, but which, in the end, always return. And the certainty that these invisible forces reach us when we least expect it is what makes all the difference in our journey of coexistence with the world around us. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, exploring behind the scenes of this social transformation and the revelations that this night brought to light about our journey of coexistence with the natural world, with the impact that our actions can generate, and with the consequences that we often insist on ignoring. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because it is precisely there that we begin to understand the true essence of this story. After all, the episode of that attack of giant marimbondos, which became a kind of natural punishment, reveals much more than a simple miscalculation or a thoughtless decision. It exposes a way of seeing our relationship with the world, a mentality that we often adopt without realizing it, based on the idea that we can control everything around us. And the hidden truth is that this posture of arrogance and contempt for natural limits is often what leads us to situations of risk and imbalance. When we decide to challenge the cycle of life, for example, by trying to invade a space that is not ours, we are actually going against a force that we cannot fully understand. And the moment this force manifests, it comes with an intensity that reminds us that life is more complex than we imagine, that it has its own rules, and that breaking them has consequences. This story makes us reflect on the importance of a change of mentality, an internal transformation that allows us to understand that our actions have an impact, often invisible, on the environment. Every decision we make, every step we take towards a goal, must be done with respect and conscience. Because deep down, true wisdom lies in recognizing that we are part of a larger system and not its absolute owners. Nature, with its quiet and unpredictable force, often gives us signals that we are going in the wrong direction. And when those signals turn into real consequences, like pain, fear, and defeat for those criminals, it's an opportunity to learn, a moment to open our eyes and understand that the impact of our choices is often greater than we can imagine, and that true transformation begins within us, in the way we look at the world and our actions. Behind all this narrative is a revelation that few want to accept, that the universe has its own way of doing justice, and that it is often disguised by events that seem coincidental but carry deep meaning. The episode of the swarm of marimbondos is a perfect example of this. It shows that even when we try to manipulate or defy the natural cycle, we end up awakening forces that we cannot control. And these forces often manifest themselves in surprising ways, as a lesson that comes from where we least expect it. It is a reminder that the journey of self-knowledge and personal evolution involves accepting that life is made of cycles, of delicate balance, and of limits that we must respect. When we act with this awareness, our relationship with the world changes, and our decisions become more aligned with the true essence of existence. At the same time, this case reinforces the idea that our actions do not happen in a vacuum. Every choice, no matter how simple or insignificant it may seem, carries an impact that can be reflected in ways that we do not even imagine. It may seem like a decision is isolated, but it is part of a chain of events that shape our history, and often the history of others as well. And realizing this, we become more attentive to our attitudes, more responsible for our own lives and the environment around us. After all, true change does not come only from great actions or dramatic events, but from the understanding that everything is interconnected and that our decisions, however small, have the power to generate consequences that reverberate beyond what we can see. This reflection leads us to a humbler, wiser stance, more aware that by challenging the cycle of life, we are actually putting our own journey at risk. And at that point, it's clear that the killer swarm story isn't just a narrative of terror or natural punishment. It is an invitation to change our mentality, an opportunity to rethink our actions, to understand that we are often just passing through this great system that is life, and that by respecting its limits and learning from its lessons, we can create a more harmonious, more balanced, more true relationship. Because deep down, the greatest revelation this story brings is that transformation begins within each of us, in the way we face the impact of our decisions and in the willingness to learn from what the world presents to us. Thus, our journey of evolution is not only about achieving goals or fleeing from danger, but about developing a new mindset that allows us to live more consciously, more responsibly, and more in line with the essence of the universe. He said, "That makes sense to me. If you made it this far, I want to thank you for following this story to the end." I think it reminds us of something important, that our actions have consequences, and that often nature gives us signals that we need to respect the limits of the world around us. These reflections may seem profound, but in practice, they help us think better about how we deal with the environment and the decisions we make day to day. If this content has brought some reflection to you, it is the suggestion to subscribe to the channel. Here we always try to bring stories and insights that make us think, learn, and grow a little more with each video. Leave a comment telling if you identified with any part, or if you have any similar experience. I am with you until the end in this journey of discovering more about the world and our relationship with it. Oh, and if you liked what you heard, a natural like helps a lot to keep the channel active and bring more content like that to you. Thus, we create a true connection without haste with themes that really make a difference in our worldview. There's a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there, so we can further explore together these stories that challenge us to think beyond the obvious. I'll wait for you there.